Things never go as expected when I follow Tommaso's storytelling. At any rate, the Sire de Coucy, Enguerrand de Coucy, was a man who needed no title, for he was an owner of lands and riches galore. A fortunate man who once married a king's daughter, and then, when she toddled on, married the love of his life. So he was a fortunate man in all things, except he did not have a son. He had a beautiful daughter named Isabelle, and he and his wife could deny Isabelle nothing. And so, in a time when a woman married who her father picked, who was probably the joint landowner or a man of high title and power, he said, no, Isabelle can meet her own man, love him, and marry him. So Isabelle grew, she bloomed, she was beautiful, but she could find no man who suited her fancy. And this made her very sad. And one day, she was walking along the battlements, and she looked over because she heard a bop, bop, and there was a raven going bop, bop. And she looked at him and she went, "You're funny." And so she went bop, bop, and the raven went bop, bop. And every day after that, she went up to the battlement, and she and the raven played. They had wonderful games, and she told him all of her heart's desires. And she looked at him one day and she said, "You need a name." And he went, "What?" And she said, "But you have lovely dark eyes. I will name you Beauvoir, Beauvoir." And he went, and fall turned to winter. And her father finally said, "Isabelle, it's wonderful to have a beautiful daughter, but to have a bitter spinster around is not going to be pleasant." And so he had a grand ball for her, and he said, "Choose your man this night." And she went up and she said to Beauvoir, "Oh, Beauvoir, I don't know what I'm going to do." And he went, and she went, "Yes, exactly." And so, the night of the ball, all the handsome young bucks in the country came. You were there. And she still saw no one who took her fancy, until walking into the hall was a tall, dark, handsome man in a feathered cap. Yes. And without saying a word, he bowed to her and bowed over her hand and took her dancing and swept her off her feet. And as the ball was coming to an end, he disappeared, except for his hat. And she picked it up and said, "But Father, I found him. He was under this hat." And so the call went out in the land, and all the young men were brought in to try on the hat, for it would be the man who fit the hat that was the man of the house. Exactly. And when one wore it with a small head, the hat was too large. When one wore it with a large head, the hat was too small. No one fit that hat. And she didn't know what to do. She poured her heart out to Beauvoir, who said, "Arr." And one day, she placed the hat in her chamber and went to supper, came back, and the hat was gone. And she was thinking, "Oh, that naughty Beauvoir, what has he done?" And she went up to the battlements and said, "Beauvoir, did you steal the..." And there was the tall, dark, handsome man. And she said to him, "You're here." And he took her hands, and they looked deeply into each other's eyes, and she said, "My lord, you're the love of my life, and you've never said a word. What is your name?" And he looked at her and went, "What?"